and welcome to the Pompey Politics Podcast.
I'm Ian Tiny Morris.
And I'm Simon Sansbury. So excuse if we look like we're playing with some new toys, but we are a little bit, but hopefully they look. But you'll also have noticed, that those of you who are watching the live stream, that we are joined already with our guest this evening, Simon Bosher. Welcome, Simon.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Thank you for agreeing to join us.
Yes, well, new technology. You surprised me by not asking Alexa what the time was. So we're already in disarray. Not that I'm pointing the finger or blaming anybody.
Well, I just want to see if you're on your feet. So apologies for that. Yeah, okay, sorry. But should we get underway?
Yes, we've got a new gizmo. So if you are typing along in Facebook Live or watching on YouTube, the chat will appear. Simon will manage it all, I'm sure, and I will just keep rambling on as is my way. So perfect. So delighted to have Simon Bosher with us, councillor for Drayton and Farlington. Simon.
Yes, indeed, Ian. Drayton and Farlington councillor for 20 years. It'll be come next May.
Good Lord! And part of the boy band that is yourself, Ryan Brent, and friend of the pod, Terry Norton.
I wouldn't necessarily. Well, they may well be a boy band. I don't think I qualify for that, to be quite honest.
No problem. So, just taking on the role of Conservative group leader. So, for those that don't know you, can you just give us a brief kind of how did you end up in the world of local politics, and just give us a bit of an insight into you?
Well, I've always been Conservative by nature anyway. But I was quite heavily involved in the 90s in the attempts to keep Fratton Park out of its relocation to Farlington. I wasn't one of the leading lights. I was more one of the very active foot soldiers in that, and drove around really slowly in the Drayton and Farlington area to demonstrate traffic problems and the such like. And when it came to about 2002, we had the City Council had an all-out, all-in election. And two of the Drayton and Farlington councillors at that time, Ian Gibson and Fred Warner, who sadly passed away about 2-3 weeks ago, both decided that was their opportunity to stand down. So we needed two new candidates for Drayton and Farlington, and somebody suggested I put my name forward for it. I foolishly agreed to something which I didn't know what I was letting myself in for, as you do. Was selected and approved for Drayton and Farlington, stood in 2002. The rest, as they say, is history. Why Drayton and Farlington? Well, I'm a Pompey boy. I grew up in Farlington. I went to the Solent schools. I went to Springfield, and so and I actually live in Farlington, and so do 4 generations of my family. So I'm actually representing the community that I actually grew up in as much as anything else, which led to some interesting conversations on the doorstep in 2002 with a lot of people saying, I remember you when you were at school. And then you start to get that hot flush as to whether they remember you in a or otherwise.
So what about outside of politics? Kind of because obviously people are seen as councillors, are very one-dimensional as councillors or as party members. What else has taken you there?
Well, I mean, I do work full time. I have a job in the what we call the HVAC industry, heating, ventilating, and air conditioning, and I'm a specialist when it comes to fire protection in ventilation in commercial buildings and such like. That's what I do day to day, which keeps me out of mischief, gets me out and about. So I still swim a bit. I used to be a national competition swimmer in my youth, and I also play a handball sport, and I do occasionally do that as well. And over the past 2.5 years, I've gone from no grandchildren to 4 grandchildren. So
wow,
I've a rough idea what my children were up to during without. We're slightly before the watershed on that one, but you can draw your own conclusions.
Absolutely, and I guess the attraction of Grandad being free childcare has got to come into play as well.
That has happened over this weekend, I have to say, Ian. I had one of my grandsons with me this weekend overnight, who seemed to think that breakfast consisted of ice cream because it was Grandad. So we had a few debates around that one, shall we say, but it's fair to say you got spoiled rotten, as you do. Grandparents can just give them back afterwards.
Yeah. Your child seems very excitable now and full of sugar. Bless you. There you go.
He's back with his parents now, so that's their problem, not mine.
Super.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Simon. So what was it that attracted you to the leadership role?
We've got a good team of councillors in the Conservative group. I did do it once before, prior to Donna Jones. I had to step down for personal reasons and hand over the baton to Donna, who was my deputy leader at the time. And I guess there was an element of a bit of unfinished business. And I think there were a majority of the group that considered perhaps the fact that I was what they call the older statesman, which I'm not that old, is perhaps I was probably the best person to take the group forward. So I was happy to accept that and have taken on the role.
Okay, well, it's interesting I mean, it's quite interesting you say that, because people's kind of journey to leadership roles and indeed actually onto the council is usually there's never usually a direct path. There's usually kind of loads of twists and turns, I guess, with everything else in life, isn't there? So we're bound to ask, because you being selected into the leadership role for the Portsmouth Conservative group on representing on Portsmouth City Council, which only came about actually only a few months after your predecessor Matthew Atkins was selected. What's kind of happened that's caused the vacancy?
I think with Matthew, it was, I mean, as people know, he is a lecturer at Portsmouth University. And I think even though he has his aspirations and his ideas, I think it was very fair to say that he suddenly found the role of being a group leader and all of that it entails, because quite clearly what people can see as a public meeting schedule for councils and the committees, when it comes to the role of group leader, there are a myriad of other commitments that you have to undertake to represent your group. And that, coupled with the pressure of being a university lecturer and the start of the new term, it was just that something had to give in his life in that respect. So we held a group meeting and they elected me to replace Matt.
And I saw in the evening news, evening news tends not to give particularly long articles, a little touch on your vision for Portsmouth. Would you like to expand on your vision for Portsmouth and perhaps how that maybe differs from Donna or Matt's?
I don't think my vision necessarily differs too much from either Donna or Matt's in that respect, because it's largely a conservative vision. And I think if I had a radical change in direction, then the group probably wouldn't want me as their leader if they had a different view. After all, we're a democracy in our group as much as they are in the Liberal Democrats and the Labour group in that respect. But certainly we need to look at the green agenda very closely. We're already coming up with a lot of ideas that we want to put forward in our budget. Traditionally, when you're opposition, your budgets don't get through, but you tend to find that any good ideas you may well have tend to get adopted by the administration party anyway. That's the nature of politics in Portsmouth. But also, it's what I see and hear around my ward as much as anything else. We need to start getting back to basics. There are too many grand schemes that are being floated as vote winners, and really we're losing sight of things like the bin collections, the streets are not as clean as they used to be. I mean, certainly if I look at Drayton and Farlington point of view, we've had a complete mess with our bin collections over the past sort of 4 or 5 months, not being collected on the appropriate days, through taking a lorry out of service so they can actually reroute the services a little bit to save money. We've even got residents in Drayton and Farlington now that are cutting their own verges because it never happens. We don't get street cleaners up in Drayton and Farlington, certainly not the automated ones. So every time it rains up here, we've got flooding issues, and everybody sort of holds their breath. And that's an ongoing hot topic certainly in parts of Cossam and in parts of the lower areas of Drayton and Farlington. Every time we get heavy rain, we're getting floods. And sometimes you need to sort of like go back to the basics and say, let's get it right so that we've got cleaner streets, we're getting all the basics correct, so that we can instill some pride in the city with amongst the residents. Because if you've got infrastructure that is not working and falling apart, then people are not going to take the pride in the city that they've actually got. I'd also go on and look at things like public services from a point of view of buses. We've also got taxis, and there are things around that we can look at doing. Certainly back in 2018, when I was traffic and transportation lead, I was engaging with Stagecoach and with Volvo at the time to look to bring electric buses into Portsmouth. We were pretty close to it there. There was an element of technology issues around it, but certainly we were looking at very close with Stagecoach to replicating an arrangement that they have in Guildford. That seems to have fallen away a little bit. And I also introduced electric vehicle charging points, both off and on street, which Lynn Stagg has carried on with, which is great to see. But the focus around the electric vehicle charging point seems to be largely around what is in the benefit of residents who don't have the ability of having off-street electric vehicle charging points. We need to roll it out a little bit more. If we're trying to encourage things like the private hire trade to engage with electric vehicles because of the air quality issues, then we need to provide the infrastructure that's actually going to support that and encourage them to actually do that, which we don't really have at this moment in time.
Would it be fair to say that, Simon, some of the really big issues, we know that the whole issue of not quite so bad in the north of the city, but in the south of the city, particularly with the likes of the congestion and the air quality. Is it a case though that the really big issues always get kicked down the street because the solutions are politically toxic?
Yes, and I think I would agree with that. I mean, the clean air zone is a good example of that. I mean, the government are imposing a clean air zone on us, and all right, it's my colour of government that are doing that, but I think it's an issue that needs to be addressed. We've had the edges of the clean air zone fiddled around with and taken Fratton Road out. You could argue that was for political opportunism there. And recently we've had a report that's actually come through the cabinet where just about every single vehicle you can think of has been given a sunset clause, with the exception of the private hire trade. Now, if you're going to have a clean air zone, you don't want to start introducing it and then say, oh, but by the way, your vehicles have got another 2 to 3 years to be compliant. We need to look at it now. And noticeably, for anybody that's seen dust carts, let's say, going around the streets that tend to go at a very slow speed by the nature of what they're doing. Certainly over the summer months, it was perhaps more noticeable with the weather, but most of them are enveloped in almost in a cloud of fog where they're actually belching out fumes. And you've got to look at it and say, you can't give these guys 2 to 3 years to sort that out. They really need to be doing that now. They're a contracted service. They should be looking to do what the city council want them to achieve in that respect. So you either do it or you don't do it. You don't do it for some and not for others. And so those sorts of things need to be addressed. And sometimes you have to take difficult decisions for the benefits of the city that you live in. Certainly, I've got members in my group that have aspirations to go beyond being city councillors, and I fully support that. I don't. At the end of the day, I'm over 21. I've been a councillor for 20 odd years. My family live here, so I look at it and trying to do the best for my family and the place where I actually live. I have no aspirations to become an MP, and I question the sanity of anybody that does, but that's entirely up to them and what they aspire to do, to be quite honest.
Perfect.
Thank you. So I guess what's kind of clear to anybody that that looks at kind of what happens politically across the city, some wards in the city are quite clearly kind of fortress Conservatives, some are fortress Lib Dem, and you know, in some areas it kind of seems that, you know, that actually kind of seems to be a given rather than actually something that seems to change over time. Is there any, what reasons would you say that there might be that particular wards might repeatedly return the same party?
I don't think there are that many wards that actually do that, Simon. I mean, I've got 20 years of history with the City Council. When I first got elected, St Thomas was entirely Conservative. Central South, so you had I think it was one Conservative and two Labour. Hillsey was two Labour and one Conservative. In fact, as I recollect at that time, Alastair Thompson, who was the Conservative, actually got there by drawing lots. Otherwise, it could have been three Labour candidates there. And certainly, if you look at Paulsgrove, that has historically been three Labour councillors until quite recently, actually, probably in the last sort of 8 to 10 years. And even if I look at Drayton and Farlington, we went through a period, and I know there are lots of comments made about sticking a blue rosette on a donkey and it will get elected in Drayton and Farlington. But we still have to work at it. We still hold monthly surgeries, and we still are out and about meeting people and putting literature out. Because if you get complacent about things, it will drift away. And Paulsgrove arguably is a good example of a degree of Labour complacency, which has seen the Conservatives are now an independent actually get elected, so that there are no Labour councillors there at all. I mean, Drayton and Farlington back in about 2004, 2005, the majority was about 150, which I appreciate with some wards is quite high, but traditionally in Drayton and Farlington, 150 is a problem as far as we're concerned. But we've dealt with it and we've addressed it. But you also got to factor in there that some wards, the council teams work very well. There are some hardworking councillors from all parties across the city, and even though you're not likely to get elected as an independent on your own track record, people recognise the work that their local representatives are actually undertaking on their behalf, and they will sometimes look for that person to vote for that particular person.
So I agree with you. I think you're right. As you kind of look back over time, there's certainly been lots of changing of hands, for want of a better phrase, in lots of places where where political parties either lose their ability to campaign or indeed they've got complacent, and they do change over time. But when you look at it kind of at the now, it's only a snapshot, I guess, of history, isn't it? So I get what you're saying there. And I mean, Drayton and Farlington is a bit of an example where, I mean, I would never be as unkind as to say pin a blue rosette on a donkey. I mean, my metaphor was stick one on a Tesco trolley, but nonetheless,
yeah, we only have a Sainsbury's up here, Simon.
Oh, of course, yeah, and yeah, there's no I in my name, so I no connection. But it's but yeah, I kind of I can see what you mean there. That over time, actually, if you rest on your laurels, it's a lesson. It's a lesson for all, isn't it? Which I guess kind of takes us neatly in a segue to the next question, doesn't it, Ian?
Yeah, indeed. So we covered the we cover the local extensions pretty extensively, including having a number of online hustings. I guess how much of a surprise was it to the Conservative group the success that George Madgwick had not just in winning the seat, but in seeming to mobilise a whole section of Paulsgrove who previously didn't turn out to vote?
It was a surprise, I have to say. We had a very strong candidate there in Tony Hewitt, who we consider to be a really good, strong candidate to take the seat. I think it's probably fair to say that there might have been a bit of disillusionment with party politics, which could be a wake-up call for every political party in that respect, because what he's done is reasonably unique. It depends how the proof in the pudding now is how George is going to perform over his next 4 years, in all honesty, because being an independent is a lonely place to be. We've only really ever had one other successful independent in Peter Ashley, who was before my time. But it's down to him, and he's got to stick to his election pledges. He was all in favour of remaining as an independent, and how he pitches his allegiances going forward. It will be an interesting thing to see what he actually does. I mean, certainly when I've spoken to him, it's been a case of, well, what will the Conservatives offer me? Because Gerald's already offered me a cabinet position to join the Liberal Democrats. Now, whether that's fact or fiction is neither here nor there, but it's George's perception with his electorate that if he wants to get re-elected, is what he's actually got to address and be true to his points. I certainly have always been like that in Drayton and Farlington, with regards to being honest to my electorate. If I can't deliver something, I will tell them I can't deliver it, and I will give them the reasons why. So at least they can't turn around and say, you promised this and you haven't delivered it.
Do you think that, again, it's going to be, without wishing to draw into looking ahead too far, Simon and I, because we love a spreadsheet, and it's going to be very interesting next year that the two members of the Portsmouth Progressive People's Party, who are sort of semi-independents, both are up for re-election next May. Do you see a challenge to the main parties from independents, or was George possibly just a flash in the pan?
I think if you actually look at George's success, I think that is going to give a degree of encouragement to others to say, if one has done it, then there are opportunities for others. I think, I mean, let's face it, with the two Portsmouth Progressive Party members, they were both elected on a party ticket in the first place, and they actually chose to step aside. But it may well give an opportunity, and I think even though it was a ward that the Conservatives hoped to take, I think it is a sounding call for the benefit of all the local parties to say that we can't just be focused onto what each of the three of us are up to and what we can achieve. We're going to have to look to say there is going to become opportunities from others, particularly if they're looking to stand in the wards where they actually live. And we need to take those sorts of people seriously. And certainly from the Conservative point of view, we've done a lot of analysis on what actually happened and how we can address it, and we will do our best to take that forward into the next elections, no matter which ward they're in and whether there are any independents standing. I wouldn't be surprised if come May 2022 we actually saw more independent type candidates standing in various wards in the city, and I think for the main political parties, we write them off at our peril.
It's I mean, it's an interesting point that's to be honest, that finds consensus in the comments. We've got Councillor Lee Hunt has commented that he feels that George Madrick and his independents will do well as they wish to work hard, and that in Wells and other places independents do well. So why not here? So I guess it is a word to the wise, isn't it? As that all parties, regardless of which party that is, they need to keep their eyes open and not fall into the danger of complacency. And Tim also reminded us that because of the delayed local elections, just to remind our listeners, in Portsmouth, we elect one of the 3 councillors in each ward in the city 3 out of the 4 years. So 3 out of 4 years there will be one of your 3 ward councillors up for re-election in each of the 14 wards in the city. And Lee reminds us that because of that delay, sorry, not Lee, I beg your pardon, Tim reminds us that that George's term would be a 3-year term because of the elections we had this year were meant to be the elections that we had last year, but they were put off because of
I think we're all
discombobulated.
We lost a year in our lives, haven't we, in 2020?
We have indeed in so many ways, but it certainly caused consternation with lots of campaigning and how to organise things and get things done. But it is an interesting case in point. So thank you for that. I forget which one's the next one. Is it you or me, Ian?
Well, you have thrown a curveball in by putting 2 question 5s into the mix, which is so this one is, this one is you.
Okay, right. Okay. Okay. So I know we touched on it a bit earlier. Obviously, Donna is a well-known character locally, well-known political force locally, and indeed, obviously, she was successful in being elected as the Hampshire Police and Crime Commissioner. So she's definitely a well-known force in local politics and big shoes to fill. How do you think that you'll manage that as a comparison of as a political operator and as a character?
Well, I'm not looking to fill Donna's shoes at all, to be quite honest. I'm looking to wear Simon Bosher's shoes going forward with how we do it. I don't think much will change. Donna was a very successful leader of the Conservatives and of an administration in her time here. She's moved on to pastures new, and I'm very reluctant to look backwards. She has her legacy with Portsmouth City Council. It's about looking forwards as far as I'm concerned. So it isn't about Donna's shoes, it's about Simon Bosher's shoes. And indeed, the same will apply to any member of my team. I've got an excellent team with a wide spread of expertise, both in their respective fields and in their work life outside of politics. And it's about giving them the opportunity to step up and fill their own shoes and carve their own careers in local politics. And indeed, with some that may have aspirations to go even further, as I said before, I'm more than happy to assist them in any way that I can to help them achieve their dreams, so to speak, if that's what they choose to do. But it's my shoes and my feet now.
Good answer.
So if we look back, and I know you said you don't like to, but we've got to look back at May and the May elections, where we saw the Conservative group become the biggest group on the council. But I think what became abundantly clear is that effectively, Labour are always going to give a leg up to the Lib Dem administration. I guess the challenge, probably your biggest challenge, Simon, is going to be how can the Conservatives get to the point where they get to an absolute majority? Because it seems until then, the Labour team are always going to give the leg up to the Yellow team.
Yes, I guess the vote Labour, get Liberal Democrat message is out there. It's not a secret anymore. I think a lot of Labour voters will probably have been very disappointed at the speed at which they were happy to vote for the Liberal Democrats in that respect. If the Conservatives are going to get an outright majority, then we make inroads into the Portsmouth South constituency, start taking more seats down there. That's where our focus is going to have to be. And indeed, the same would apply to the Liberal Democrats. If they're looking for an outright majority, then they're going to have to make significant inroads into the Tory heartlands in Portsmouth North, effectively. That's where our focus would be. And I suggest that That's right. I'm just looking at Lee Hunt making little comments there. But that's where we're going to have to make the inroads. It's going to be a tough ask. I think that's been shown in the recent general election with Stephen Morgan slightly bucking the trend, and seats tend to just flick between Labour and the Liberal Democrats down there, with the exception of where we have down in Eastney and Craneswater. But I say, looking back, if you look at it, you can go back to say St Thomas was largely a Conservative area, so there we've got to be looking at why we no longer really feature in places like that and what we can do to actually address that. But I think we need to be looking at the south of the city if we're going to get that majority. Otherwise, we're going to be constantly having one party propping up another in the south of the city just to try and maintain the administration. But Labour make no bones about it. If the Conservatives said it was one colour, then Labour would swear blind it's another colour. They will not support the Conservatives in any shape or form.
Well, I guess the thing to remember is they. I'm sure your knowledge will correct me if I'm wrong, Simon. But didn't they do that in 2014, and they weren't exactly rewarded for doing that in returning? So I guess, is it really that they're guaranteed to support a Liberal Democrat administration, or is it more of a given that they absolutely definitely wouldn't support a Conservative administration because they'd receive a kicking from their members and supporters? Is that it? Kind of puts an interesting dynamic, doesn't it?
Well, with the best of the world, I mean, they've obviously got their reasons for it. I wouldn't like to second guess what's happening at Labour Party HQ in Portsmouth, because it baffles me at times. But each vote actually has three choices. It either has a for or against or an abstention. They've made a conscious effort to actually vote in favour of a Liberal Democrat administration. They do have that option to abstain if they don't want to get into that particular bum fight. But they make their choices accordingly.
Yeah, no, we did all the maths on that, and it was fascinating because when we did the maths on it, had they have abstained, and had the Progressives backed the Lib Dem administration as we thought they would, it would have actually come down to George Madgwick having the casting vote as to who would take the tiller. So I think to Simon's point, the anyone but the Tories approach was probably what tipped them over the edge. So just looking at the city, it does feel like at the moment, I guess, like there is a north-south divide. The Portsmouth North Conservative Association, of which I'm a proud member, seem very strong, seem very active. It feels like the south of the city perhaps has lost its way a little bit as a Conservative group. How would you hope to reinvigorate that?
We have. I don't know how the other two parties are structured. I suspect they have one association that covers the whole of the Portsmouth area. The Conservatives are subtly different, if that's the case. And the fact that we have associations that reflect the geography of the parliamentary boundaries. So we have a Portsmouth North Association and we have a Portsmouth South Association. Even though my role doesn't interfere with the goings on with the associations, they are effectively our lords and masters. I'm going to be working to make sure that the two associations are working very, very close together. And indeed, I'm sort of pushing at an open door there. We've got two excellent chairmen in Terry Norton and Rob New, who are working very closely together so that we have a consistent campaign that goes out across the city.
It is. I mean, it is interesting that, because I know I'm not sure about how the Labour Party's structured, but I suspect you're right that it's a citywide, but then subdivided into branches. I know that the Lib Dems is basically a citywide for the two constituencies. But it's interesting that, considering we have a battle usually between the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives for control of the council, but at the moment, when it comes to the constituencies, Penny Morden's got let's be honest, an unassailable majority in Portsmouth North, and Stephen Morgan is very good at using his brand and a very very strong MP in Portsmouth South. So it's kind of Portsmouth's a bit weird in that sort of way. From when it comes to local politics, there seems to be a different choice between a choice between blue and X, whereas when it comes to national politics, when it comes between blue and X, the X is quite clearly Labour. And as you said, Labour, Stephen Morgan bucked the trend of the Labour Party overall at the last general election, and actually gained share of the vote, whereas across the country they'd actually kind of dipped. So it's quite an interesting one, isn't it, that the city splits in those two different ways, that the voter seems to make a different choice depending on what type of election it is and actually who's standing.
Yes, I think you're right. I mean, speaking from my own experience, I've actually stood at the same time as a local when there's been a general election, and it's very interesting that all my other elections, the questions on the doorstep have been about local issues. It's been about the local environment, the local parks, the local infrastructure, largely to do with Drayton Farlington. But when you get to a crossover where you've actually got one election day with regards to both national and local, the questions that I get asked as the local candidate then move into more issues like the NHS, foreign policy, defence, all those sorts of areas where I have very little influence. But it depends where the focus of the electorate moves to when you have those sorts of particular issues. And probably true for a lot of candidates, again, of different parties that may well have stood been on their own, that they're being asked questions about the local street scene and their own individual roads. But when it actually coincides with the general election, probably the questions actually shift a little bit, and that's where the influences actually take over. And certainly the late Ken Elcombe, again in Drayton and Farlington, he used to dine out on the fact that his last election, where he was re-elected, coincided with the general election with Penny. Dined out on the fact that he had a 4,000 majority in Drayton and Farlington, which was pretty much unheard of. And we had to point out to him that it was actually probably more to do with Penny in the general election than it was actually to do with Ken's good looks and nature.
It's a strange one, isn't it? I guess with any form of election, you're all of people can vacillate all they want about the numbers, but the only answer they know, the only question they know the answer to is, who do you want to vote for? We can always guess about why and what their motivators for, but it is an interesting one to kind of kick around a bit and to try to understand how it is, and perhaps to think that that's an odd thing that the voters in Portsmouth are able to make a different response to a different question actually is just shows that voters aren't stupid. They're quite capable of making decisions.
Absolutely not, which is why I work my ward, I like to think, very hard. So we have our monthly surgeries. We get a pretty good turnout of residents that come along to. We will sort out literature. I mean, we aren't made of money in locally in the Conservative Party, despite what others say. We have a finite budget. We will be targeting some wards and not others, and certainly Drayton and Farlington will not be one of those target wards. There's no point in adding another 50 or 60 votes to Drayton and Farlington and losing seats elsewhere in the city. It doesn't make any logical sense as far as I'm concerned. But seeing what's happened in the likes of Paulsgrove and even last year, arguably, but certainly going back to when it was rock solid Labour ward, and the fact that they certainly took their eye off the ball there. They were concentrating on winning seats elsewhere, and they took their eye off the ball, came to Paulsgrove, and they lost it. So you've got to protect what you've got as much as anything else. And that largely comes down to either the candidates or the sitting councillors actually putting in a shift. And that shift doesn't happen 6 weeks before their re-election. that shift, as far as I'm concerned, happens on day one after they've got elected.
Indeed. And is the next, do you want to take the next one, Ian?
Oh, yeah, I'll do that. So Simon and I, look, we don't have to sit through them, you do. But the full local council meetings are often full of motions that are calling on the council to write to the government to complain about something, or there is the motions appear to be a grandstanding gesture, and obviously after 12 hours of fun, I'm sure everybody's had enough of that. How if you, how do you think that can change? And as the Conservative group leader, is that something that you're going to focus on in terms of trying to make that business of full council more meaningful and less, shall we say, pantomime?
I've often said, and my group will probably agree with me, that full council meetings tend to be 8 hours of my life I'm not going to get back. And all the focus tends to be around notice of motion. And sometimes what starts at the beginning of the agenda, there are some really serious, strong topics that sometimes just seem to get nodded straight through without so much as a second thought. We're in the curious situation where with some of those you have to oppose them to be able to speak them, even if you actually agree with them. So you're starting out by opposing something when you're not actually going to oppose it, because and sometimes I've done it, and there have been other councillors from other parties have done it, where they've opposed to speak to something purely because they think it is a serious issue that needs to be discussed, even though they agree with it. But notice of motion, and some of them that go down there, I mean, there have been some that we've looked at and said we could have supported that because the notice of motion was pretty valid. It was well written, but there's always a paragraph in there which seeks to bash the government of the day or take a snipe at the administration to make it unpalatable. So the nature of the notice of motion may be a good one, but it's actually getting lost because there is that little bit in there that is trying to get an opposition or administration party not to vote for it. So then the Twitter feed's going out, the administration hasn't supported this, or the Conservatives have ignored that. And sometimes you look at it and you think, really, if you hadn't put that little bit in there, we could have had a 5-minute debate, all agreed it, had a plan of action and moved it on. But that's where it perhaps needs addressing, I think. But that's down for the individual groups to look at it from are they doing it from a political point of view, or are they doing it from a Portsmouth point of view? And these things are coming in more and more and more. And I do find it frustrating because we all have group meetings before council meetings. We all look at the agenda. We all see exactly what the others are trying to do with it. And sometimes you look at it and you think, that's going to be an hour's worth of debate about that, but we know exactly how everybody's actually going to vote before we even get there. And you think it's frustrating.
And is there room to have those dialogues within the group leaders? Because we've read them before, and the motion before this council is that kittens are cute, and by the way, all Tories smell of wee, and I don't mean the French perfume. So obviously the Tories aren't going to vote for that, which means that the Twitter goes out with Tories hate kittens. Is there any chance that we move towards a more mature politics where the group leaders actually start to have those dialogues that say, oh, for Christ's sake, can we just not waste each other's time?
I'd like to hope so. I mean, I became group leader on a Friday because that's when we hold our group meetings. And Gerald was one of the first people I had a long conversation with on the Sunday. I've always had I'd like to think, a good relationship with Gerald. We regularly pick up the phone. We have done several times this week. He actually sat in our group room at some point last week and we had a conversation, and that doesn't often happen. So I think there are opportunities there. George Madgwick approached me for a meeting. We sat down and had a chat over a coffee. Sadly, the one person that I have reached out to and said perhaps we can have a chat is George Fielding, and as of yet, he's not even returned my call. And I've been group leader for what, month now? Yeah, just about a month, just over a month, and he's chosen not to engage with me at all, which is disappointing, because you've got to ask yourself, are you doing your role for your political party, or are you doing it for the benefit of improving Portsmouth? I would argue my position is I'm trying to do it for improving the benefit of Portsmouth, because by default it improves the conditions for my family and my friends.
Well, and I think Simon and I have touched on this before. You know, the vast majority of people who get into local politics, you don't do it for the fame or the big bucks. You know, there is an element of you know, the vast majority of people we've had on the podcast, irrespective of their allegiance, are people who genuinely at their heart want to do the best for the city. And it feels like sometimes, you know, despite this being a political podcast, the politics gets in the way.
It does, which I do like engaging with my local residents and having a chat with them. It's where I get perhaps the most satisfaction out of what I've do. And the moment I start to tire of that, that's when I look at it and say, is this the time to hang up my cloak and move on to pastures new? Perhaps the easiest example I can give, and it's an anecdote that I put out before, and it was probably about 2007, 2008. I was contacted by an elderly lady whose street light outside her house wasn't working, and could I get it sorted out for her? It wasn't difficult. You know, I had she told me where she lived. I got the reference number off the lamppost, pinged into the city council, can you sort it out? And it was done 24 hours later. That's what it's all about. But probably about 7 or 8 days later, I got a 4-page handwritten letter from this lady thanking me essentially for what I did, which essentially wasn't a great deal. It was a couple of telephone calls, but it was about her quality of life, her security. She lived on her own and all those sorts of things. So I sort of looked at it and thought, you probably spent more time writing that letter, posting it, than I actually did to get that actually sorted out. And it's those sorts of things that I think, if we as councillors lose focus on those sorts of things, then that's the time when we need to seriously look at ourselves and say, am I in this for the right reasons? And it's those sorts of things that I get the most satisfaction out of helping out the local people. And what I may think are straightforward issues, but to them they are much bigger. In this lady's case, it was all about her fear of crime, her security issues, because the street light was covering the front of her house in darkness because the bulb had gone.
Thank you. So from your response to that kind of moves us onto the next one, kind of trying to find the common sense and the I guess the room for agreement. I think it's a fair description to say that the full council meetings are a bit of a pantomime. But other than that, and I suppose it's probably only lots of people like us or campaigners that actually probably religiously watch the full council meeting, and certainly all of it. But when it comes to election time, all of the parties tend to put out their communications. Usually these days that's still in leaflets. So we're still kind of shedding loads of dead trees to get that message out there. But it's all of the parties, to some degree or another, you see different sets of information in their literature and in their digital communications. So whether it's a dubiously chosen survey results or horrific bar charts or news about traffic schemes, plans that don't exist, how important is it to you that political candidates don't misinform the public and actually are presenting information that enables them to make a reasoned judgment about who to vote for?
I think you're referring to the notorious Lib Dem bar charts that we've all seen with not winning here. I think residents across the country have wised up to to that one and the basic scale of what they actually do. Certainly an expectation from my point of view going forward that the literature is as accurate as it can be. I think it's fair to say that on certain issues you're always going to get a political spin on it. That's to be expected in that respect. But you've got to look at it, and perhaps I look at it when I'm doing my literature and say, if I say this, is it going to come back and bite me hard at some point in the future? And if there is either a question mark or a yes against that, then I'm not going to put that out in my literature for next May. But if the answer is no, because I'm comfortable with the message that I'm putting out, then I will put it out. I think we all get a little bit inflamed with some of the literature that gets put out from all parties. I think what they're actually saying, because it slightly differs perhaps from another person's perception of it. But generally speaking, I think most of it is accurate. I think the inaccuracies come when you start trying to quote opposition councillors, and you've got to be so careful when you actually quote opposition councillors or opposition candidates for that matter, and make sure that you're factually correct if you're going to go down that route. Arguably, I wouldn't go down that route of quoting it, and it doesn't, and it also applies to all other manner of campaigning. And a lot of parties like to move into the street stall scenario. Again, when I was up for election 4 years ago, the Labour Party, and I will name the party, decided to hold some street stalls in Drayton because they were actively campaigning up in Drayton. And the candidate or the candidate's representative at that time that was stopping people in Cheltenham was actively telling them that Simon Bosher didn't live in Drayton and Farlington. Now, arguably that's a little bit wrong in the very first instance, but unfortunately the people he actually told it to were my flaming parents. And you're exactly where I lived, and unfortunately my father is not exactly backwards in coming forward with his views. So you've got to be careful when you're engaging in those sorts of conversations, even out and about on the doorstep, because you never really have an insight into that person that's opening the front door to you, unless you know they're a card-carrying member of your party or somebody you know personally.
And that must have been a marvellous moment for your dad. I'm sure he rubbed his hands together. Oh, so tell me about this Bosher chap. You know, I need to know more about him.
Well, I mean, all right. The guy that was there was offering the information, so my dad wasn't really asking.
No,
they're dyed in the wool Conservatives. You can imagine they were just going to go wandering on straight past to do what they wanted to do, but he actively stopped them and engaged. But you know, you've got to be so careful about what you say. I mean, it is funny and you do about it, but sometimes you don't. But it's certainly something that my dad's still dining out on, that's for certain.
absolutely. So just as we come to the end of the show, Simon, kind of conservative to conservative,
Mm-hmm.
you know, obviously we're at the stage where, you know, the Conservative Party still holds a you know, the polls are still in our favour. You know, we've got an 80-seat majority, but I guess one of the things I'm struggling with as a fiscal conservative is that we seem to have this sort of mad spend and tax policy at the moment. I guess, what would your message be to fiscal conservatives like myself to encourage us to keep the faith?
I think we don't need to lose focus over the fact that we've actually had a pretty devastating pandemic over the past 18 months. And to a certain degree, it's still going on. And with the things like the furlough scheme, the government had an awful lot of money to actually keep people in employment and keep things working. That, to me, needs to be paid for to a point. I think the approach with upskilling jobs that we've heard from the Prime Minister recently will generate more tax income anyway. Certainly, we are in a situation where everything that was spent over the past 18 months to actually keep the economy going and to keep the country moving needs to have a price ticket and be paid for at some point. My party is traditionally the party of low taxation. I noticed Tories, Lee Hunt saying the Tories misled voters at the general election. They said no tax rises in tax, but between the last general election and now, we've actually had a pandemic. And I don't think anybody could have envisaged that going forward in the way that they couldn't envisage the 2008 crash that we had in the economy and Gordon Brown flogging off all the gold at next to no prices. These sorts of things come along from time to time. And I would like to think that going forward, the tax rises are largely going to be temporary. I like to think that we're going to get back to the party of low taxation going forward. But I think we do need to stimulate the economy and start paying the COVID pandemic bill.
407 billion. That's quite a credit card bill.
But then you've got to look at it and say, what could we have done? Sat back and done nothing, or alternatively, we could have gone down the Labour route and spent money to going twice that, because obviously with Jeremy Corbyn's promise of free sweeties on everything at the 2019 general election, would he still have been delivering that and paying everything going forward? They've all been calling for extensions to the furlough scheme and extending it to a lot of other aspects of society. But you've got to sort of think, you've got to look at it and say, it needs to be paid for. That's the way I'm looking at it, to actually get us back to a degree of economic stability going forward. We just can't keep writing blank checks, and I would defy any party in government to keep writing blank checks to support it going forward. Even Keir Starmer is beginning to row back on Jeremy Corbyn's views.
Absolutely. Well, Simon, thank you ever so much. It's been a fascinating insight, and that's been superb. So you've been listening to the Pompey Politics Podcast. I've been Ian Tiny Morris,
and our guest has been
Councillor Simon Bosher.
And I've been Simon Sansbury. Don't forget to join us next week when we'll be asking a party member from each of the three major parties to tell us the top three things from each of their party conferences. So there'll be more information about that out during the week. But thank you for following. Please don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and follow us on Facebook to make sure that you get notifications of when we're live.
Our rating, because we are good.